of you would like to clean porta potties for your daily living? All right, thank you. We can talk about that later. But I wouldn't want this. This is not a job I'd probably wish on my worst enemy, because this isn't so fun, right? And yet I will never forget the attitude this guy brought when bringing porta potties and washing them. He basically had a game with it. He had fun. He said he was a warrior in the battlefield of poop. I'm sorry if that's gross, but this is gross. And he considered himself a soldier and just a great, phenomenal worker. The CEO of the company recognized that, and the CEO actually, I think, had some fun even scrubbing toilets. Saying about his company, if everyone worked the way this porta potty cleaner worked, they'd have a really good company. Giving their all, having fun, and then some. I say this because we're considering not the culture of a company, but of our church through this series, DNA. And can you imagine what it would be like if our God, Jesus, went undercover? Like, what would happen if Jesus came in, and sat by us in the pews? What would he see, and what would he feel about how ministry is done? Now, of course, he's not undercover, he's invisible, so he's here with us and he knows, but what would that be like? In the Church of God, and here not just Amazing Love, in the Church of God in America, would he see people who are driven to bring their best, even when it gets stinky, dirty, and messy, because that's what sin does? Or would he find something else? That's what we want to talk about today. That's what we want to talk about. And our motivation for today is no longer going to be the porta potty cleaner, although I like that guy. Our motivation for today is from King David. And we're going to see how his heart was aligned and how he wanted to bring his best before the Lord. And the scripture for us is from 2 Samuel chapter 7. I invite you now to turn to the middle of page 7, and we're going to read from 2 Samuel. It says, after the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord to give him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, here I am, living in a palace of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent. Now we know, after reflecting, after seeing all that God has given him, he wanted to build a temple for God. And he wasn't the one to build a temple. We'll find later in that chapel that because he had blood on his hands, because he was a warrior, God said, no, you're not going to build the temple. But he desired, and he collected the things to build one of the greatest wonders of the world. What he desired to build was this, the temple for God, which again, Solomon's temple, maybe you heard of even if you're new to church today, and one of the most miraculous, most awe-striking things that were ever built. David was inspired to bring his best. That's what we want to talk about. As we consider David's life, I wanted you to do some introspection. I wanted you to bring to your mind one thing you know about David from the Bible. And I want you to do this work because I'm actually going to ask you to turn to someone next to you and tell them what you know about David from the Bible. Now, if you're a visitor or new, or this Christianity stuff is new, I'll give you the blanket answer. He was a king. So if the mind's not working, just tell them that he was a king, so you're all good to go. But I want you to turn to someone next to you and tell them something you know about David from the Bible. Ready? Go. What do you know about David? He's a king. Any stories? Talk about David. All right. Probably enough. All right. We had a series on David. David's a great guy, and a big picture of the Bible is all about David. And I would imagine some of you, when considering David, might have had this, right? Maybe you remember David and Goliath. That's his maybe most famous story. Maybe you remember this, his worst moment, David and Bathsheba, right? Maybe you remember that he was from a family of misfits. In fact, his father-in-law tried to kill him, and then his son tried to kill him. And you think your family is bad. This is bad news, right? This is David in the Bible. But I had you do this exercise because when the New Testament writers look back at David, you know what they bring to their minds? You know what they remember about him? This. Here's some words from Paul. It doesn't say giant slayer, adulterer. Here's what David's remembered for. I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my or God's own heart. You see, what we remember about David's story is his heart most of all. He was esteemed and is praised for the caliber of his faith. And that's why I think he's a good example for us. Because if you're new to Amazing Love or been here for a while, we're dreaming right now. And we want to align our hearts with God's. And I think today we have a prime example of what we should align our hearts to and towards as God works inside of us. And so David, the man after God's own heart, he was inspired so that God would have a place worthy of him. No longer a tent, but a miraculous temple. You know, and as we consider David, I love what prompted David. Look again at verse 1 and 2. I love what prompted him. It says, after the king was settled in his palace, the Lord gave him rest from all his enemies around him. And he said to Nathan the prophet, here I am living in a palace of cedar. Now I look at what David is sitting in, this palace of cedar. And through my study, I have found this to be true. I have found that God is not against us having nice things. That's what I found. God is not against us having nice things. If you heard that God hates rich people, you heard wrong. And the reason I think David is such a good example for us today is because we might not have palaces of cedar, though our dressers might have some cedar in them, I'm not sure. But we go back to some pretty nice houses, don't we? Quartz and granite, marble. We got stainless steel and some rich mahogany. God has been pretty good to us. God is not against rich people. And the reason he's not against us having nice things, and this is really easy through the lens of the Bible, is because he gave us these things. He gave us these things. He knows what we have on purpose. And he likes that we have good things. You look back at David's life. David would never be sitting in a palace of cedar unless God gave him strength to beat Goliath. We would not have a lick of good if God had not given us life, strength, opportunity, talent, ability. He is the source of these things. And that's why he's not against us having nice things. He gave them to us. And so here's our first principle. Here's the first takeaway for today. All right? If you're tracking with me, bringing our best. The first principle we want to consider is this. Just to be real, if God has been good to you. That's it. That's where it starts. Not to excuse it away, well, someone else has it better. Not to explain it away, well, it's actually the banks or, this old jalopy, you should see the new model. No, if God has been good, you don't have to hide it. You don't have to act like you stole it. You can't hide it from God anyway, by the way. You just have to be real, right? I think, we're tempted to hide it at times because of maybe a misplaced sense of humility. That if we would be real with all the good things, maybe they'd think it was us and it wasn't us anyway, so we can be real with the fact that it's good. Tracking with me? So first thing is just be real. If God has been good, recognize that. Awesome. That's not bad. But second, let's take it further. Take it further. Look what he says in verse 2. He says, here I am living in a palace of cedar. And then he goes on to the next thought. So he's real with God's goodness, but then his next thought is this: while the ark of God remains in a tent. And I didn't know David's not mine. Maybe I'll ask him in heaven what was actually going on when he penned this. But I would imagine there was something going on to this degree. I am but a man, and a sinful one at that. I know I could not get here without the strength of God, and yet God, who is much higher, much more worthy of praise, much more honorable than me, a sinful person, he's represented by a tent. What's up with that? What's up with that? And the thing is, it wasn't that God is needy, like, I hope the people respond, because otherwise I'm just going to, I can't survive without, something golden. No, it's not that he's needy, it's just that he's worthy. Does that make sense? As we consider bringing our best, it's not that God is needy, it's that he's worthy. To talk more about this, here I'll give you the principle. That we desire greater things for God. David seeing his house and saying, God maybe should maybe have greater things than me, but a man. I had an application in my own life. Some of you may know this past week I was able to see my parents who live in Orlando. That was cool. Good to see them again. And it was cool because they had a very momentous occasion in their life. And maybe some of you have this experience. They finally paid off their house. And it was cool them telling the story. I guess there were tears in the parking lot of the bank, and some members of their church came up and like, "What's wrong?" And they said, "No, it's good. And I was reflecting as a son. And as a son, I just say, man, that's awesome. As a son, there's something inside of me that says, they've been so good to me, so loving. I just want them to be well. And I want them to have good things because that's what they've given to me. And I want their futures to be well. You ever had that for someone? You just want someone to be well. Maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's your parents in reflection of them. Maybe it's someone in your family. You just want them to be well because of how they've worked in your own life. That's David. And what limps in my earthly analogy, again, is not that God was needy. He just wanted great things for the God who had given him so much. That's all. And so let's get back to undercover Jesus. When undercover Jesus walks in, and not just our church, but the church of God, does he see people driven by bringing their best? The best of the effort, the best of the talent, the best of, yes, financial gifts? Or does he see something else at times? I would admit to you that because of our sinful nature, we don't always look at what God is worthy of, do we? And I would admit with you that too often I'm plagued by a leftover mentality. That God, even though he's worthy, he gets the leftovers of my talent, the leftover of my effort, the leftover of my possession, the leftover of my finances. This is sin, dear friends. And we have an opportunity to consider once again what he's given us. I think what really cuts us to the heart is because we know internally how good he's been. That leftovers is not what he gave us. When he came into this world, he gave the best. He gave up huge riches for the poverty of earth. He gave the best of his effort to live under the same laws but never sin. He gave his very life, to which not many people can say have done for you, so that we could have forgiveness. And dear friends, I want you to lift up your hearts. We are forgiven of all our sins, maybe if you're not convicted by leftovers, for anything weighing on your heart. And that forgiveness is full and free. And he delights to see his children at peace. And that is then our fuel. That is then something that drives us to say, there is a glitch in the matrix. There is something wrong if I do not respond in turn with my best. Because that's what he's given. Let's get back to David. David was prompted to give and to build this temple. And if you read the Bible, you know it's Solomon's temple. His son builds it. But what you may not consider is that David was the one to collect the materials, and David was the one to get the blueprints, so that when Solomon lived, all he had to do was step into the building project. Again, he had to do none of the planning with Aspen Group, although I'm not sure they had Aspen. He had none of the collection of materials. David did that all. And what's interesting is they record what David gave for the building of this temple. In 1 Chronicles, which mimics 1 Kings, and I know that's some Bible, 1 Chronicles mimics some of the same storylines as Samuel and Kings. It records what David gave for this building of the temple. And if it's okay, I want to share with you what David gave for the support of the temple. This is what it was. In 1 Chronicles, it says, "Besides, in my devotion to the temple of my God, I now give my personal treasures of gold and silver for the temple of my God. Over and above everything I've provided for this holy temple, I give 3,000 talents of gold." Now, that you don't know what that is, but I'm going to explain how much that is in a second, okay? It's not just David, though. David had leadership, and the leadership team also responded. It's so fitting. They gave towards the work of the temple of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 derricks of gold. Now let's unpack the talents. Here's my equation. 8,000 talents which they gave, when converted, is 300 tons of gold. Oh my goodness. I was trying to see an equivalent. 747, if you've ridden on a plane, weighs about 200 tons. So 300, I'm trying to picture this. And then I know gold is high right now, but regardless, 16 billion, if you break tons down to ounces, is the initial offering that David and his leadership gave. And he gave silver and precious jewels besides, but this is just gold. So this is incredible. This is truly incredible. What David was responded to give as he gave his best. Why does this matter? You maybe have received information about Build Out, Reach Out, haven't you? And we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. And if you're a guest or visitor, you can tune out. We have a church capital campaign that we're starting. And in Build Out, Reach Out, it's basically our hearts aligned with David's. We want to build out a beautiful worship space for the Lord. Not because he's needy, but because he's worthy. That's it. And in this process, as a pastor, I just encourage you to be real with God's goodness. If God has been good to you, recognize that. That's awesome. Don't feel bad about that. But then second, I would encourage you, and this is not like you're going to hell unless you do this, or it's just encouragement in response to the gospel. I would encourage you to desire the greater things for God. We live in a world where we remodel our homes and we have great technology and great furniture and carpet, and if we're accustomed to those things, why not just bring those to the church of God as well? Let's bring our best. That's the opportunity. And what's our motivation? What's driving all of this is really the gospel again. We believe that the best reflects what God gave us. So I encourage you. Finally, a final consider why we want to bring our best for Build Out, Reach Out is because we are reaching out. We are on a mission to reach the lost with the love of Christ. And when people come in, we want them through our ministries, through our effort, through our facilities, how things look, that they get a sense of the caliber and quality of God, that He is worthy of honor. He's worthy of our best, whatever that might be. And stewardship, again, is that line of what our best looks like, and we're okay with that. But let's just bring our best and see what that looks like. For God is worthy. Amen. Please stand. And the peace of God